Hello and welcome to Connected. I'm Divya Gopalan. Now, March 22nd is World Water Day, and we at Connected feel the issue of water is way too important to be confined to a single day of the year. It's something that should be more than a passing thought or just a day marked on the calendar. So that's why we're continuing our conversation on the looming water crisis. And to help talk this through, from Mumbai, Ambika Vishwanath, the founder-director of the India-based Kubernein Initiative, weighs in. And here in Taipei, we're joined by Paul Jobin from the Research Institute Academia Sinica. Now, Ambika, let me start with you. You'll be attending the World UN Water Conference in New York. I just want to ask you, what was your takeaway from last year's event or the year before's event? I know what you're going to say, but I want you to say it.
This is the first time this event is happening in over 30 years.
And why is that? It's astounding that we're not talking about this more, and especially at the United Nations level.
So at the UN level, under the UN water body, there is sustained conversation, but this is the first time this is happening in, I think it's 37 years actually, for it to happen at the larger UNGA level, where almost all countries are participating in some measure or the other. And they have civil society participating, NGOs, organizations like mine, as well as researchers. So they've created a much more integrated stakeholder platform, which is amazing. It should, like you said, be happening every year, but at least it's here, it's now, it's next week, and I have very high expectations for this event next week.
Ambika, you know, in 2010, the UN, surprisingly, it was just in 2010, passed a resolution recognizing the human right to water and sanitation. And my question here is, it's great to have these conversations, it's great to have these directives, but has it really made that much of a difference in governance and the mindset in general when it comes to how we should treat water?
So once the UN passed that resolution, a lot of countries, in fact, realized that they didn't have it within their country. It wasn't enshrined in their own constitution or in a system that was within their country. And there was a rise of almost, I think that the numbers are a little bit different because countries have different systems, but basically you saw almost 60 to 65% countries went back and looked at how they defined water as a human right, and if they defined it at all, and made necessary changes within their governance systems. So it's an important step for sure. I also cannot believe it only happened post 2010, but it's happened. A lot of developing countries, especially, that face more water stress in many ways because of their development agenda, economic growth potential, industrial growth, and to combine that with a primarily agrarian society in many of these regions, they've had to consider what water as a human right means for their citizen, but also what water means then for their growth potential, for their energy potential. And so that conversation that is started, it's nowhere near as big as it needs to be.
And Paul, the whole idea of this discussion not being broad enough, particularly you're looking at industry, you're looking at water waste related to industry. Tell me what kind of a discussion is happening here in Taiwan.
It used to be a hot topic like every 10 years. Now it's the frequency of becoming a hot topic is increasing, which is maybe a sign that something is changing. In India, the water resources come mainly from the monsoons from the south and from the Himalaya from the north, right? So India is such a big country. It's hard to compare Taiwan with India, but I mean, in Taiwan, it's also globally, generally speaking, an issue between north and southern Taiwan. The configuration is very different between the north and the south of the island. So basically, where I live in Taipei, it's the situation is not so alarming, but in central and southern Taiwan, the lack of water is becoming really an issue because of the lack of typhoons. And this is recent. But you know what? What brought the issue to the spotlight of global media? It's not because of agriculture, which is the main user of water, but because of semiconductors. The world was suddenly afraid that, if there is no water, the semiconductor industry will not be able to provide us the semiconductors we need for all our industry. And that's why what it became a worldwide story for a few days, and then everybody forget once again.
So in this next piece, we sent our reporter James Chater to southern Taiwan, where the reservoirs are hitting historic lows. Take a look.
This is Taiwan's Tsungwen Reservoir, the country's largest. From a distance, it looks picturesque, but water levels here are running dangerously low. Right now, it's below 20% capacity. That's mainly because a typhoon hasn't made landfall in Taiwan for more than 1,200 days, and it's been nearly 600 days since torrential rains hit this part of southern Taiwan. That's a big problem, as not far from here are two of Taiwan's biggest consumers of water, and some say two linchpins of the country's economy. Tsungwen Reservoir lies around 60 kilometers from Taiwan's southern city of Tainan. It supplies the Jiangnan Plain, one of Taiwan's most productive agricultural areas. But it's also an hour's drive from the Tainan factories of chip giant TSMC, the Taiwanese company that makes more than 90% of the world's most advanced semiconductors.
Tsungwen Reservoir plays an extremely important role in the water resources of Taiwan's south.
But those resources are under extreme pressure. Boats at the reservoir are working through the day to desilt the water. That process aims to increase the reservoir's volume by removing sediment from the water. But officials say more frequent extreme weather events in Taiwan, like many places around the world, are limiting the impact of those efforts.
Right now, the water situation at Tsungwen Reservoir is severe. The water level is currently at about 200 meters. At capacity, it should reach about 230 meters. What does that mean? Well, the level just below the trees is capacity level. We are doing everything we can to complete this work. Of course, we hope that people recognize that every drop of water is precious, that people enact water-saving measures and cherish the water resources.
The government has announced it's looking for emergency water supplies, but the barren bed of this reservoir is stoking fears Taiwan could experience a drought like in 2021. At that time, more than 1 million households were forced to ration water. Seeing Lin, Jasmine Lin and James Chater for Connected.
Ambika, both Paul and James touched on the whole semiconductor industry and its use of water here, and the focus on that because it's such a critical industry to Taiwan and the rest of the world. But what kind of conversations are you hoping to that at this UN conference that you're going to go to? What kind of conversations are you hoping that will emerge from that when it comes to industry and growth and water usage?
I just want to say I like that your reporter talked about how the government in Taiwan is looking for emergency water sources. I assume that the government realized this is not like a bank. You can't just go to the other bank for a loan. I don't know where they're going to get these emergency water sources from. So maybe there needs to be some change in thinking as to how you look at this in the future. Paul rightly said it was a semiconductor industry issue. It was also Cape Town's day zero that brought this whole water issue a lot more to the forefront. And the fact that in COVID times, you needed water to be able to safeguard yourself from the spread of COVID by washing your hands for those 20 seconds. So it is now, I would say, the conversation is going to be around green hydrogen. we're looking at a lot of renewable energy going forward, and there's a lot of push in India for more renewable energy to be able to meet our needs, and also to be more green and sustainable going forward. It's a push that's happening in Europe and in many other parts of the world, and so green hydrogen has become everybody's favorite buzzword, right? But it's green hydrogen. It is not possible to be able to produce that level of green hydrogen without water. And so my real hope is from this conference next week, but also going forward, is that we understand just how closely water is connected to so many aspects of what we are doing going forward, in the way we are trying to define and redefine our growth patterns, whether we are talking about a high growth country like India, or even countries that have reached their level of development and want to sustain that going forward. This is the conversation that needs to emerge from next week, whether it is water as part of your daily citizen consumption, how do we change our irrigation patterns for the better urbanization, technology, energy, fashion, food, whatever it is, and climate. As you know, I really like that Paul is like, this is not climate change, this is a climate crisis, and a climate crisis is a water crisis. Are we having that conversation? Are we really understanding how these two things are connected, and then looking at that? We are talking about rising heat. I mean, we've seen the kind of heat that Europe has experienced in the winter. It was a really mild winter, and that is also then connected to your water issue, right? And so all of that interconnected nature where water lies at the heart of so many things, if after next week people can take that away and say, okay, let's rethink how we look at that industry that we are in, I feel like then that conference would have achieved something really good.
Now, as water becomes more scarce, we're sure to see more and more conflict over its use. TaiwanPlus reporter Tash Butler takes us to southern Taiwan, which is facing a historic drought. This is his report.
This rice field in southern Taiwan looks lush enough, but a closer look and the effects of drought become clear. The farmer here in Qishan is digging wells to beat the dry spell. He says finding water is tough at the best of times.
正常有水的时候就已经抢不到水了，缺水的时候更抢不到，就抽井水啊，不然就从另外口外的水把下游的引上来。
Qishan is in Kaohsiung, one of 4 areas in southern Taiwan facing a drought. Farmers in this part of the country rely on water from the Gaoping, Taiwan's second biggest river. But that river is drying up. The Gaoping just had its driest January on record, and March is looking even worse. Officials say they're laying pipes to bring water from the neighboring county, Pingdong.
高屏溪川流水因为久旱不雨，所以逐步的一个减少。那为因未来的一个用水需求，所以我目前就是以多调水的方式，从屏东地区的加工出口园区调既有的水井，然后把它送到高雄市。
Those pipes should be completed by the end of April. But environmentalists say the bigger issue for farmers is local industry taking water intended for public use, effectively cutting in line in front of the agricultural sector.
旱灾来的时候，既然公共用水都比农业用水优先，那所以公共用水里面的，不管你是民生的，还是工业区的，还是科学园区的，就通通一起比农业用水优先。那这个我们是认为是有问题的啦。
Pipes or no pipes, Taiwan's south simply isn't getting enough rain. That's partly down to human-caused climate change, which is making the yearly rains more unpredictable in South and East Asia. In Taiwan, authorities hope temporary measures can beat the drought until heavy rains, which are expected to arrive around May. And for farm workers in the area, the sooner that rain comes, the better. Leon Lien and Tash Butler for TaiwanPlus.
The water stress, being able to access water, and this perhaps between countries, the southern islands in Taiwan actually buy water from China.
Yeah, so bringing to answer about to what extent water is an issue regarding the cross-trade tensions between China. Well, compared to India, I mean, on the continent, between countries like, for example, India, Burma, Thailand, and Vietnam, they're all dependent of the Himalaya. So if Chinese companies come there and build dams on the river, on the Mekong, that will of course create conflicts between those countries. We don't have, so there's obviously a kind of water politics, hydropolitics, but we don't have, water is not such a matter of conflict in Taiwan between China and Taiwan, because we are not dependent on China for our water. Except some places which are Jinmen and Matsu, which are closer to the continent, they are completely dependent on China for water. Where water can be a matter of geopolitics is, for example, regarding the trade-off that we will have to do, like between, if we have to make choices between preserving the semiconductor industry or sacrificing the rice farmers. For sure, rice is super water intensive agriculture, but we need rice to feed ourselves, right? It's also a matter of food sovereignty, of food security. I mean, I don't want that, but just
right.
in case
so let me bring Ambika in here. Ambika, India, what's known about India is different states have very, very different conditions. India is vast. Are you seeing the kind of tension or some kind of friction between the states that have more water resources and those that don't? What kind of diplomacy is happening?
But there is conversation also between other states on how we can work together on some of the shared resources. Those resources are largely currently only rivers that has not really extended to groundwater, which is a lot more shared, of course, across the country. But there is hope that this level of discussion will lead to some sort of cooperation, will then lead to some sort of better management, where we look at the river or the resource, a lake or a groundwater, as a whole unit and not as a subset of units, which is how we have seen it in the past. So if you look at the Ganga, for example, which passes through 5 different states in India, each state has done what it's wanted when it looks at the management of the river within its own state. Now there is a little bit more cooperation between states on that one larger river, and people are looking at that river as one unit. There are also examples from around the world that I feel like we could study more deeply and bring those experiences to India. And we talked about this earlier as well, Divya. It's right. You're right. It's and Paul touched upon this. It's the idea of conflict over water. And since the 80s, since I have been working in this space of water in the early 2000s, the one thing that they teach you and then you hear constantly is that, world war over water. And of course, nobody can predict what's going to happen down the line. But if you look at the last several decades, there have been more instances of cooperation over shared water than there has been conflict. In fact, 4 times more instances of cooperation, whether it's a treaty, an agreement, an MOU. And these are also between countries that have no other forms of cooperation. They have chosen to exert some sort of positive movement on their shared rivers or lakes. And that is a very powerful example that I feel like we need to expand on. There is potential for more of this.
It's estimated by 2040 that most of the world won't have enough water to keep up with demand all year long. In that sense, what kind of water diplomacy and what does that translate do you hope to see before then that will allow us not to have to get to that point?
2 things, if we can get started on now, is one is raising that level of awareness of the value of water. So diplomacy within countries as to what this actually means. And between countries is, if cooperation on your rivers or shared bodies, water bodies are not possible, which is in some cases, a means to safeguard that from other issues. It is a step in the direction, it is a building block towards perhaps then cooperation in that space going forward. And there are plenty of examples that show us that this is possible. Also, maybe I will add a third thing if I can, is look at what we consider the low-hanging fruits. I mean, it's an incredibly overused term, but it's a useful term as to what is actually feasible. Let's not try for some of the bigger areas of cooperation on water, but look at smaller, more achievable areas that might also then be the building blocks. But that awareness needs to be there both by countries, by industry, by agriculture, and by citizens especially, that water has a value and we need to understand what it is.
And to you, Paul, what do you hope will be the conversation and the changes we will see in Taiwan with regards to water?
Oh, if I may, I wanted to ask a question to Ambika.
Go ahead.
Because, yeah, given, the tension between Taiwan and China, and also China is also some conflicts with India, right? What would be the key point to make these big countries cooperating or fighting on water resources?
So
that's a big question.
Big question, Paul. I feel India-China, the potential for being rivals is already here on many other issues. But what a lot of people don't realize is that India and China actually cooperate on very small but actionable items on our shared resources. So, for example, on exchanging data, on monsoon, we do some work together with China and other parties on our doing more research and understanding our glaciers. So it exists, this discussion. The issues between India and China are numerous, but on this space, at this point, it is still something that both countries are aware of and I don't think are likely to exacerbate.
Okay, so then to that point, Ambika, what about those people who say that the next world war will be fought over water?
I mean, I don't agree with that simply because of what we've seen in terms of cooperation, like I mentioned, between countries that don't necessarily have cooperation in many other areas, but have worked together on water, whether it is something as small as an MOU or an agreement or larger river basin management systems. So I don't necessarily see us having, World War III on water. However, the likelihood of world war or other war between nations over other issues where then water becomes embroiled in that and it then is a cascading effect, that is probably much more likely. But do I see, India and Pakistan, for example, and this is the question everybody asks, right? Are India and Pakistan going to amass troops and go to war over the Indus Water Treaty? No, we have this treaty. It is binding. And both countries, for all of its bluster, still respect that treaty, despite all of our differences. If we look at what's happening between the Tigris and Euphrates, countries that share these rivers in Central Asia, there is still movement towards trying to see what can be done in terms of water cooperation, even if they are really small building blocks. And so in that sense, I feel like there is more hope that we can still push it further and further away. But we are still ultimately dealing with human nature. So I will say all of this with the caveat that tomorrow anything is possible. But given my research and my studies, I don't foresee that.
Right, so I'm going to take that away from what you said and leave on a slightly more hopeful note. So Paul, what would you like to see change in Taiwan, or what are the conversations you feel there needs to be about water?
Another discussion I would like that we have is about how should we organize trade-off between different types of users. I mean, like in contrary to India, everybody has access to tap water. So this is why we take it for granted, because, everywhere you go, even in the most humble home in Taiwan, you will have water. That's a big difference with countries like India. But that's the negative part of that is that, we don't put so much attention on how water is scarce. And the next problem is how to organize a fair discussion. I mean, it's politics, and in the Chinese character to say politics, there is water. So in Taiwan, and when we speak Chinese, there is this notion that politics is eminently hydropolitics. It's about governing water. So we have this potential to pay a lot of attention to water, to put water at the center of politics. But we need much more effort to organize this as in a fair way, that everybody has his say on the issue. I would like the rice farmers as an equal part compared to the semiconductor industry.
And sadly, we're very quickly running out of time, but I do want to thank you, Paul and Ambika, for your time and your insight. It's been a great conversation. Thank you very much for joining us on Connected. And to our viewers, we hope that this discussion made you think a little differently about how you treat and use water, an element that is so necessary to our existence on this planet. Stay connected.